Well, here we are at fabulous Southfield Reservoir to do some bream fishing, and it's one of my favourite places. Second cast, we've got a bream, and it's a good one as well. This is one of them 3 to 4 pounders. This might be even bigger. It's a good fish. So I'm going to show you a few tips about what I do when I'm bream fishing on reservoirs on places like this, because there's a couple of points that are really important. And I like to play sometimes quite low bream fishing when I'm playing a fish, but it's very shallow in the side here and there's rocks, and so you've got to get them up, otherwise your line gets through rocks. But what's really important when you're doing this, because that's a proper 4 pound that. Look, Ben's getting excited. Look, he knows when I've got a fish on. Look at that beauty, second cast that. So I'm going to show you all my kit, the balance setup and everything like that, and what I do. Alright mate, calm down, it's only a bream, should be used to these now. Look at that, it's proper than that. Oh, great start that, get it in. So there you go. So what we're going to show you is how to catch these beauties, the rod, the reel, the line, the braid, the hook length, and the feeders that we're going to be using, because it's all really important. And like I said, there's a few tips that you really need to know. Let's get another one. So I've sat on peg 14, which is on the canal bank. I've got the Aaron Calder canal behind me. So why have I sat here? Well, wind's off my back basically, and it's quite a strong wind, and we've got it for filming purposes. You can hear me, we can film better, and there's still a ripple on the water. Ideally, the other side further down in the 30s, 40s and 50s would have been better, and there's probably 6 or 7 fishermen there already, which tells you that's where they're catching the fish, and I know that from the matches. But it's more difficult to film when it's really windy, so we've come here for that purpose really. However, if the wind had been blowing into us, these are the best pegs. These are great pegs. There's a connection to the canal just there where the water goes in and out, and there's a flow. So like you can see my tips bend round, so we've got a bit of flow. But the fact is, the wind's off us back, we can film a lot easier. But when I'm fishing, there's still a ripple, and that's important. A bream are associated with wind and ripple, and it just makes it simpler to fish, especially on this type of lake that's only 3 to 4 foot deep. So that's the main reason why we're fishing here. These are fantastic pegs. They're better pegs when the wind's coming in, but we don't want to film with the wind because you can't hear us basically. And I still think we'll catch a few fish, but we can show you how to catch the fish a lot more easier. Right, my bait selection is pretty straightforward and pretty simple. In matches when we come to Southfield, we're not allowed to use pellets or anything like that, so it's normally standard live bait. Pinkies is my #1 thing. I never go bream fishing, skimmer fishing without pinkies. I like pinkies, especially if they're dead, they lay on the bottom, and I think that it's a great bait. Hook bait and sometimes a little bit of feed is dead maggots, so I just put dead maggots in. And then worms. You can't go bream fishing without any worms. Got dendrobinas there, which will be chopped up and put in my feeder. Usually chop them really fine, unless I'm fishing just for big bream, then I might not chop them up as fine. And then red worms for the hook. I like to put a red worm sometimes on the hook, or a little dendrobina. But that's the key, the ground bait. The ground bait is really important when you're bream fishing. And you can see that mine's a dark green colour, and I prefer that kind of colour. I was the last person on green ground bait, I'll be honest with you. I was also natural ground bait, but green fine ground bait now. Then I put my combination of my chopped worm, my maggots and my pinkies in that. But the ground bait is really important. When you're feeder fishing, it's all about getting the fish that'll come to the feeder, so your ground bait's got to be 100%. That mix I'm absolutely delighted about. One of the things that I'm different at than most people, I won't say everybody because there's a few who do it this way, is the way I position my rod and where I position my rod. And you can see that if you've watched my videos in the past, I call it hands-free, and I like it to the side. I like almost a 70 to 90 degree pull where my tip is, so you can see that my rod's down the side more. I'm right-handed by the way, and and I've got it on 2 rod rests, as you can see. It's stationary, it's stud, and it's pretty straightforward. So my idea is I can cast out, I can put the rod there, I call it hands-free, I can sit there, I can have a cup of tea, I can cut my worm, do my bait and everything like that, and when I get a bite it goes, and all I've got to do is pick the rod up. I don't get, and it's only a personal thing, I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm only saying it's my way, most people cast out and put the rod in front of them. I don't get that. I really don't get that, because I can't see the tip, I can't see the liners, the indication's the same, you don't get the same sort of bite, and it's almost, I think, when you put the rod out, they've almost got to hook themselves. But that's just my way, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, it's just what I do, I've always done it that way. I like to see my tip, I like to get liners, I like to see the little movements and everything. And then the other thing is, because I've got it this way, what happens is, I can feed my other lines. If I want to use a catapult, I can pick the catapult up, and I'm not interfering with the rod. I'm not interfering with anything. I can bend round and move round, and I'm looking at the tip all the time. It's just what I do. I don't get casting and putting the rod in front of them. I just don't get it. But a lot of anglers do. I don't have a problem with it. It's just that I don't want to do it. I'm really happy doing what I do. It's got a little fish. I think that's one of the nice things about when you come here. I'm not afraid of catching smaller fish as well, as long as they're skimmers. I don't want to be catching roach and perch and things like that. I want to be catching skimmers. If catching skimmers, they'll draw the mums and the dads and the granddads in. And this is a little skimmer, you see. So we've had like that. Now if I'm catching them that big, which is 4 ounces, 3 to 4 ounces, I know the mum and dads are around and I'm quite happy. So there you go, my old pal. That's a good sign that we're getting indications, and I'm really, it don't matter what type of fishing I do, I'm always looking for indications. I think it's really important. I want to know what the fish are doing. If I'm getting dinks and little pulls and everything like that, I know the fish are feeding at the feeder, and that's what I'm quite happy about. And I'm looking for, and if I get an indicate where it's going like that, and I'm getting like liners, really slow pulls, it tells me the fish are this side of my bait, and that means they might be on my 30-metre line. It's like an indication. So it's important to me that I'm looking for any type of movement on my tip, because it tells me what the fish are doing. Lovely that, it's right down the hole. And all you do, cast it out, let it hit the bottom, which don't take long because it's only 3 to 4 foot deep. And then what I do, I just put the rod tip under for, I don't know, 10 seconds or so, just to make sure the braid sinks. It's quick sinking braid anyway. So I just put it on just to make sure. And then, because what happens is if you don't and it's on the top, your tip bends round like that and you don't see the bites. I sort of make sure that the braid or the line has gone under the surface, and I think that's really important. And then all I do, put it on the rod rest, set it up. I want the tip as slack as possible, and there's an helicopter bringing me lunch. There you see, look, there's lunch is coming, Ben, up there, look. Oh, that's a bream. There you go. There you go, just sat there and getting quite a few indications, and just sat there and once picked it up and around she went. One of the things when you're fishing with a hook line is identifying the bite that you have to get and what you have to pick up on. I see too many fishermen that actually pick up on indications and liners. And what I do, that's one of the reasons why I don't hold the rod. I put it in tool rest when I'm this style of fishing. And in my head, an old lad taught me years and years ago, when you look at tip and you get an indication and you think it's a bite, in your head you go, that's on, and pick your rod up. So it's delaying it a second. But you know you're not striking at liners then, you know that it's a bite. So next time you're fishing and it moves and you think it's a bite, just in your head go, that's on. There we go, look, another £1.5 There we go. Leave him alone. Now that, so already early in the session we've had a few fish, which tells me at the moment we're on the right line, and secondly the ground bait's fine. Because you wouldn't be catching these if your ground bait were wrong and your hook bait were wrong. There you go, look. You don't mind one of them every cast, would you? So, all I'm doing at the moment, we put in, I've got 2 red maggots on, 2 dead red maggots I should say, and I've got that on, the Sensate powder on, the red Sensate powder. I'm quite a big believer in that, I like that. In the maggots, I'm putting 2 on, 2 dead uns, like that, which is a nice perfect hook bait. And then in my feeder I'm putting a few pinkies and a little bit of worm. And all I do then, with the feeder, you've got weight forward feeder, and all I do, put my fingers at the bottom like that, so they're designed that way so that the bait doesn't come out when you're filling it up. I put a little bit of ground bait in the bottom, put the worms in, just scoop it out the ground bait, bit of ground bait on top, and that's lovely. Look at that, that's beautiful. A nice meal that for them. The 2 dead reds on, bring it back 50 metres, lovely. Now you might wonder why I ended the rod that way and then I brought it back. It's simply to straighten the line out. If I left it this way, I would have got a bow in my line because the wind is blowing that way. So I always finish into the wind, and then that way what happens is your line is straight. Right, my rod choice is about distance more than anything. The length of the rod is about the distance I'm going to be fishing out. For example, I use the Marvellous all-round ones for this style of fishing in 11, 12 and 13 foot. So which rod do I use? Well, I use them, like I said, for distances. So if I'm fishing up to 30 metres, I use the 11 foot all-rounder. If I go between 30 and 50, 55 metres, then I'll use the 12 foot one, which on this type of fishing is going to be the most popular one because there's a lot of fish at that distance. But if I go past 55 metres, then I'd always go to the longer rod, which is the 13 foot. So it's about the distance that I'm fishing out to the actual length of rod that I'm going to be using. So up to 30 metres, 11 foot Marvellous all round. 30 to 55, I use a 12 foot Marvellous all round. And when I'm going past 55, it's a 13 foot Marvellous all round. And them are the 3 rods that I normally use for this style of fishing. It's about the distance more than anything else. So what about the tips? Well, if I'm fishing up to 30 metres, I normally put a 1 ounce tip in. If I'm going 30 to 55, I'll put a 1.5 ounce tip in. And if I'm going past that, I'll use a 2 ounce tip. Why, I hear you ask? It's quite simple. The further you go, if you put an ounce tip in, it wobbles more in the air, so it takes away distance. So you have to put a stiffer tip in for going distance, so it doesn't wobble in the air when you're casting. So that's quite important. And of course you've got more line or more braid between you and that distance that you're going as well, so you're liable to get a little bit more pull, a little bit more tow on the water. So it's about the distance. So 11 foot will have a 1 ounce in, 1.5 ounce in will be in the 12 foot, and in the 13 foot it'll be a 2 ounce. And it's simply so it doesn't waggle in the air and take away the distance when I'm casting out. So that's my rod choice. Now my real choice is quite simple. I use an 11 foot rod, I use a 4000 size, because you're not casting fire, you're only casting 30 metres or something like that. So a 4,000 size in the Marvellous range, and then in the 12 foot and the 13 foot I'm going to use a bigger reel. I'm either going to use the Marvellous 5,000 because it's got a bigger spool, it's a bigger wind ratio, or the Horizon long cast if I'm going a really long cast. I like the Horizon long cast. I think that's a belting reel. It's like a pit, what we call a pit reel with a big spool on, and if I want to go that extra distance, then that's the reel that I'm going to be using. So why do I like them reels? Well, quite simply, they're the right size, the spools are right, but it's the winding power. When I catch a fish or when I bring my feeder back, I don't want to pump it, I don't want to do that, I just want to wind against the fish like that and use the bend of the rod with the reel to bring the fish in, and it comes in nice and simple, and that's why I use the Marvellous reel, the Marvellous range of reels, 4,000 to 11 foot, 12 foot 5,000, and then if I'm going into a 13 foot I prefer the Horizon 5,000 long cast. It's just a bigger spool, a longer spool that makes the line come off easy for when you're fishing distances. On them reels, when I'm doing this style of fishing, I might use nylon and I might use braid. Now it's all about the bites, in my opinion. If I'm getting good pulls, good bites, I like to use nylon. And on the reel line I'm probably going to use 020 with a shock leader. But if I'm going to fish braid, because the bites are more sensitive, and most people, to be fair, this style of fishing do use braid, I'm going to use Sublime 010 braid. That's a great line. It's when you've used it a couple of times and the shyness wears off, it sinks very simple, and it's a very, very good braid for this style of fishing. The only thing I would recommend is when you're fishing with braid, you always wet your spool before you cast in. Never cast in with the spool dry, because what happens is it comes off and it wraps around you, 2 or 3 loops come off and it wraps around your rod rings. So always soak it before you start fishing with it. So I'll go back to what I said to start with. It's about the bites. Me personally, I want to use nylon. But if fish are finicky and indications are not, then you've got to use braid. Why do I want to use nylon? Because it's more supple. It's not as sensitive, because with braid there's no stretch whatsoever. So, but with both them lines, because they're a low diameter, I need something that helps me cast. And what we put on is a shock leader. And what I do on a shock leader, I'll use 0.26 Sublime. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a shock leader, so when I cast, all the power's going onto that line, and then the fineness of the braid or a lower diameter nylon comes out and helps you cast further, and you're not dragging a thick line further, which is going to reduce the distance. So how much shock leader do we put on? Well, I always say double the rod. So if you've got an 11 foot rod, 22 foot of braid, which will cover you on the reel, up the rod and all the way back, so that when you wind into cast, it's always going to wrap round the spool 3 or 4 times, and then you cast it, that comes out, and then what happens is that your braid or your finer nylon will take you that extra distance. So a shock leader is really important, especially when you're casting quite a distance. And also, because braid is so direct, if you add it direct to your feeder, when you get a fish under your rod end and it goes like that, it's proper, it doesn't have to make you jump, it's proper violent. But with the nylon, with the shocker, because nylon's got it's supple a little bit more, what happens is it cushions it a little bit, so you can still use your smaller hooks. I've had 4 or 5 fish, and but I'm getting a few indications now, so I'm going to put a worm on. Because I'm putting worms in, I've found that if you catch them on worms, sometimes you catch bigger fish, and I just want to sort out what best bait is, so I'm just going to put a worm in. I like to put like an inch of worm with a pinky or a maggot on, and see if that works. Just trying to work out what best hook bait is, because and if you get them quicker, sometimes you get them quicker on a certain bait. And if I don't get a bite, I'll go back to double maggot, but just a case of trying to work out. So I've got pinkies in, I've got a few maggots, and I've got some chopped worm in my feed, and I'm winning first cast with a worm and a pinky. So let's see what happens then. If it don't go, I'll go back to maggot. Right, so now I've got a worm on, let's see what happens. And sometimes it's the fish, it's the indications that you get that tells you there's more fish in your peg. And what happens is, I find when I'm fishing with worm, I usually get a better bite, more positive bite. And when they want worms, it'll be quicker. So if I'm getting little fish, like 3-4 ounce, which I've already had a couple, I usually cut my maggots and my pinkies out and I just put worm in, so that there's just worm in the feeder. And I'm making the fish then come for the worm, and I think that's quite important. I don't put a lot in, put a little blob in, but I like it like coming out of the side of the feeder, so when it hits the water a little bit comes off. I think that's quite important as well. But if you can get them on worm, usually that's when you get your biggest weights, I've always found, particular on here. And it's skimmer fishing, they love worms, don't they, let's be honest. Do I put them in from the start? Not always. I usually start by putting pinkies in with maggots, and just to see what's in my peg, and to see if I'm getting small fish or bigger fish. And then what I do after 3 or 4 casts, I then introduce worms. Because you come on here sometimes and they just don't want worms. So if you put worms in from start, then you kill your peg. So I always like to see if they want pinkies and maggots first. One thing I'm really conscious of, and I always have been with bream fishing, I love pinkies. I love to put pinkies in. I think every fish eats pinkies, in my opinion, so they're the actual fish attractor in my peg are pinkies. I always put a few in. I like them in the peg. I always kill them and make sure they're dead. And I like pinkies in my peg because I think every fish eats them. If I get too many small fish in, I will cut them out. But if I stop getting them small fish bites and I don't get no big fish bite, I'll start putting them back in. So I start off with them to bring fish in, and then I work it out. Am I catching too many little fish, missing too many bites, or do I need to start introducing worms to get rid of the little fish? But my number one bait on here is always pinkies. Well, we've got a little fish, which is first cast on worm, and it's a roach. Can you believe that? So guess what I'm going to do now? I'm not going to put worm back on there, but what I'm going to do is, because we've been a while into it, and at start at match I fed that 30 metre line, I put 3 feederfuls in, but of course I want to keep it going. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get rid of Ben, get out of my road. I'm going to put that down. I'm going to pick my 11-foot rod up that's clipped up at 30 metres. And what I do, I normally use just a little bit bigger feeder, and I like an open-ended feeder like that. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to get the ground bait and I'm going to put a feeder full in at 30 metres with a bit of bait on, just to top it up, because I still think that this line is a late line, like last 2 hours, but I need it topped up. So every so often, probably every half hour, just put a feeder full in like that. Just let it hit bottom, just count to 10 basically. Just let the ground bait work out the feeder, and if you pull it quick like that, what it does, it lifts it up and it just spreads it around a little bit and leaves a bit of a carpet, as I call it, on the bottom. So all I've done is prime the other swim up, really, ready for when I think, and it's for 2 reasons, that when the fish move in, they might move into that 30 metre line, and I can catch them on that. But the other thing, it gives me a second line to rest my fire line. Sometimes you have to come on this line knowing you might not catch a fish, but what happens is you're resting your fire line, and what happens then is when you go back out there first cast, you'll get a fish. One of the things I get asked a lot is feeder choice, and it's really important, to be honest with you. Anybody that knows me knows I love an open-ended feeder like that. Oh, hey, oh, better get that fish first. There you go. That was a good timing, wasn't it? But that tells you as well, even though we're going to talk about, it's a bream this as well, tells you one of two things. I've just had a cast on a worm and caught a roach, put 2 maggots back on and it's gone straight round. So that tells me, quite simply, the fish want maggots, which is pretty straightforward to me at the moment. Quick bite, dead simple. But anybody that knows me knows I love open-ended feeders more than anything. And when I can use them, I use them. For me, it just disperses the bait and the ground bait a lot easier. But they're not always the best when you're casting a long way and you want bullet feeders. And it just makes everything easier. It's a little bit like an open feeder but with a bullet on the bottom. Now what we've done at Nitro, we've developed some bullet feeders. Oh, it's a big fish, this one. We've developed some bullet feeders that are a little bit different than most bullet feeders, which when I get this out I'm going to go through. Oh, look at that, it's a beauty. That's 5 pound of that. And that was first cast back after trying that worm. Ben's getting excited, look. And I put 2 maggots straight back on, which tells me a couple of things. One, they like the ground bait, but they love the pinkies and the maggot. Oh, it's a big fish, that. That's a 5 pound plus fish, that. Look at that. Look at that, Benny. Why don't you into that one, mate? Hey, look at that. To see maggots in thing. Just take your time. Oh, it's a lovely fish, that one. Look at that. Woohoo! Get in there. That's a proper and that. Oh, that's a proper Southfield special. That can hardly lift it up. Look at that beauty. Nice. Right into scissors, that one. Into that then, eh? Look at that. It's a proper one, that, isn't it? Beautiful, that. I'm ready to that, Ben. Is that alright for you? So, you can see that, so when we're fishing at distance, and life's a lot easier, then just use that bullet feeder. All the weight forward like that, you can see all the weights on the thing. What happens is it goes through the air like that, goes to the bottom and the ground bait comes out. There's 2 special things about this. One, that's non-toxic, the weight. It's all non-toxic. There's no lead involved whatsoever. And you might say, yeah, it's a little bit bigger, but there's some countries now banning lead on feeders, and they will do, I think, eventually in England. But the main point of this feeder, this bullet feeder, is this. You can put the fingers round it between the weight and the feeder and fill it up nice and simple, so I can scoop it into the ground bait nice and simple, and you can see now it's not being forced out of the bottom, and it's nice and simple and everything's in that perfect. But most of the time, especially when I'm fishing up to 30 metres, 35 metres, I prefer these open feeders. And we've designed these open feeders so the weight forward, you can see by the taper of the weight, it's all non-toxic again, it's all weight forward. So because all the weight, most of the weight is distributed near the open part, when it goes through the water it goes straight to the bottom, and then it lies flat on the bottom and the ground bait comes out of both. So I use both and I prefer both, but for distance you want a bullet feeder. For shorter distances I prefer that. It's just about the distance that you're going to be fishing. Right, let's get another one. You see I've got my bullet feeder on. And all I'm going to do now, I'm going to put 2 fresh dead maggots on. I'm just going to hook them nicely. I've got a size 16 on. And I'm just going to hook them opposite way to each other, like that. And then in my ground bait, all I'm going to do, I'm going to put a few pinkies. I'm going to start putting a few more maggots in, because it's pretty obvious to me the fish are wanting the maggots, and I'm going to cut down on the amount of worm that I'm putting in. I'm going to put a really tiny bit, like a proper little blob. One of the things is I still think that we'll catch some fish on worm, but the fact I'm catching quicker on the maggot, I'm going to put a few more maggots in and cut down on the worm, and I think when they come on the worm, then I can start adding more worms in. But until that happens, I'm just going to cut down a little bit. Right, we had a couple of better fish and just had 2 casts without any indication. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to rest it for sort of 10 minutes and I'm going to have a chuck on my short line. And what that does, it lets me know have the fish come closer, because that's what happens. Sometimes you stop catching out because the fish have come closer onto your closer line. So I want to know whether that's happened, or basically it's going to rest the far line, and if I don't catch nothing on that short line, then I can go back out long and I've got it a little bit of a rest, like a 10-minute rest. So that's what you have to do, is just try and work them out. So it will feed me short line again, and it'll give me a chance to see if the fish have moved in and rest the far line. Because one of the things you get, and lots of bream places I go on, you get indications to tell you that the fish have come in, but you never do here. It's the weirdest place for that. You just get no signs, no indication. You cast out and you'll get a bite. It's unbelievable. So I'm going to but I've changed my feeder this time. Instead of the bullet type, I'm just going for an open-ended feeder, and I'm going to put a few pinkies in, a little bit of worm. I'm going to do double maggot again, because that's what I've been catching my fish on. And like I said, I prefer when I can to use open-ended feeders, and that's what I'm going to do. So let's see what happens. I always think that this is an important time, because I think this line comes alive more in the last 2 hours, but you never know in fishing. And for the sake of 10 minutes, I'm willing to find out if they have come close, but also it might just give that little rest on far line. And it's amazing then that when you go back out, you get one first cast. Because one of the things I believe in, and it don't matter whether you're pole fishing, feeder fishing or waggler fishing, whatever, when you change to a line, like this cast now is my first cast, this is the most important cast. And then if I don't catch, and when I go out, back out, the first cast is the first cast from a change is the most important cast, because if you're going to catch one, that's when you're going to get it. And when I have the first cast on everything, when I change, it don't matter what type of fishing it is, I never ever do anything. I won't pick my flask up, I won't do any bait, I won't do anything, because I know how important the first cast after change is. It's amazing. If I don't get one first cast, I'm only going to have one. Look, I had an indication then, look. I think that's a small fish, which tells me that there you go, look. Now we've got one, but it's a small skimmer, or I hope it's a skimmer, I think it is. But that's first cast on the shorter line, which tells you I'm going to have another one. But I never do anything on the first cast, and it don't matter what style of fishing I'm doing, because if you're going to catch a fish, that's when you're going to catch it. Now that's what I didn't want to see. Well, it's a little hybrid. You don't want to see them when you're catching bream. But we'll have one more cast because I've caught a fish. So that's not a good sign. I don't want to be bitted out like that because I'm fishing for bream. I'm not fishing for them. And it happened pretty quick as well. So we'll have another one. And what I do if I start getting pestered with them, I'm straight off it. I don't want. That's the last thing I want, is them. You might think, oh, it's nice catching them 3 and 4 ounce fish. Well, you keep catching them, but you don't win out. But I don't want to catch them. So let's see what happens this cast. Look at that, look at that. There you go. Oh, little fish, look at these. That's a bream, or a skimmer. Thought it were a little fish that, but it's not. Ooh, shaking its head this. But it's gone to right. Well, I must admit I wasn't really expecting that at this stage, but that just goes to show you. It's a bream. Might not be the biggest bream it will, but I'll tell you what, that'll be £2 plus. There you go, look. Oh, it's a hybrid. Look at that. What a beautiful fish that is. Thought it were fighting a bit different. Look at that, £2 hybrid. You'd never get fed up of catching them. Look at them, Ben, eh? You ain't to that, mate? We ain't caught one of them for a while, innit? Look at that. They're beautiful. I'll show you that one. Oh, look at that. That's a proper one, that. We're a good bite as well. Look at that, eh? Look at that beautiful, eh? Beautiful, that. Eh? Look at that, Ben. So, by changing like that, now the fact it were an hybrid, sort of, I'm not convinced yet, but I've had £2 on it in no time. So I'm going to have another cast because I've not really wasted a lot of time yet, and I'm going to have another cast. But what I don't want to do, if I don't catch on this, I don't want to waste too long because I know my other line hasn't been fed, and I don't want to leave it more than 15 minutes because I don't want the fish to move somewhere else. But if I'm catching on this line, then you've just got to stick at it because this is the line they'll want to be on. Because like I said in my intro, one of the most important things is to find the line, the area where the feeding fish are, where they're actually feeding. Right, we got that hybrid, but obviously that's not a bream. And the fact it's not a bream, I don't want to leave it too long before I go back out, and otherwise people will draw my fish. So if it had been a bream, I would have spent much longer, but the fact it were an hybrid tells me it could be a little loner, which they do tend to do. So I'm going back long because I don't want to risk, if there is any fish out there, moving to the next man. So that's what you have to do. However, if it had gone round and I've had a bream, there's not a chance I would have moved off that line, because when they're moving, when the fish usually moving on here, that's the line you've got to stick at rest at match. When they start moving and feeding and coming in, and you start catching them, and that what you've got to do then is stick on it. Well, let's see now then, like I said to you, after the change, whatever line it is, the first cast is the most important, so I won't be doing anything. Oh, there's a diver just popped up where my feeder's going to land. There we go. Might catch that. Oh, it's gone, it's past it now. So this cast is really important now because it's the first cast after probably a 15-minute, because I caught that hybrid, probably get it another cast for a 15-minute break. So the first cast is the most important cast, and you don't do anything, because if you're going to catch one, it's going to go this time. Oh, dink straight away. Little dink, then straight away. Right, I've just had a couple of casts on my long line where I ain't caught, and I'm probably 3 hours into a match now, so I'm going to go back on my short line, because what happens on here, when they move in, you don't catch them on your far line. It's quite weird. When they move in, you just you've just got to come in with the fish. So let's see if they have moved in. I'm going to go in with a worm, because when they start feeding and they come in, this place is the weirdest place in the world. And when they move in, you just can't catch them long. And of course, it's a lot easier to catch them shorter. And usually when they move in, it's better. And it's better because when the fish move in, they're moving to feed. And that means they're usually easier to catch. So let's see. So I'm just going to I'm not going to put as many pinkers in, because last time I got bitted out a bit. So I'm just going to put a few dead maggots in and a little blob of worm in my open feeder. 25 gram open feeder. And let's see what happens. Well, lovely that. Let's see what happens. And like I said, I keep repeating it, but it's really important. The first cast on a new line, you don't do anything. Make sure your line's sank. And let's see what happens. Yeah, it's quite weird on this place. You can fish 50, 30 and 15 all in a line like that, and your line will be going through them two lines, and you'll stop catching at 50. You won't get a sign, an indication. You'll pick your other rod up, cast it on your 30 and it'll go straight round. It's the weirdest place. It's that deep, but you don't get no signs, you don't get no liners to tell you they're there. It really is strange. Lots of places I go to bream fishing, when the fish come in, you get liners and indications on your tip, but at Southfield you don't. It's really strange. So that's why you have to pick the rod up and try it. And usually you can bet your bottom dollar, people that have caught the bigger weights, the 30s, certainly bigger 20s, 30s and 40s, they've probably caught the fish short in the last 2 hours. These fish now are short, stop catching long, come short. Look at that first chuck, a bream. When I say short, it's not proper short, it's like my 30-yard line, but it's a bream. But I'm not surprised. At Southfield, that's what happens. It's almost like a pattern. It's quite strange how it works, but it does do that. Look at that, it's a big one and all this. I'm going to get him up because I don't want to get snagged on there, because it's quite shallow here on these. When you come up canal bank here inside, it's really shallow. So you've got to get your rod up. Normally I like to play them quite low. But because it's shallow and there's an odd boulder, and sometimes your line gets wrapped round it, so you're better off with rod up. Look at that, it's a proper one that. Some lovely fish these. So usually when they're moving, I probably won't pick the long rod up again now. Because when they move in, they're moving in to feed. Look at that. That's beautiful, isn't it? Does it get any better than that? Come in, my little beauty. Ooh, get in there. Beautiful fish. So, like I said, that was the first cast. The first cast. Lovely £4 bream. Look at that. Let's pick him up for you. I don't like picking them up so much, but that's interesting. Last three have all been in the same place, middle and bottom lip. Look at that. Beautiful. Might not be £4, but it's certainly three, 6, something like that. Right, we best have another cast on that short line because it looks like they've moved in. But that's typical of here. The fish move in, and when they move in, and one of the things I like to catch later on close is because when they move in to feed. And I think that's the most important thing for me. They've moved in to feed. Oh, I quite like the look of that one. And I got that on a worm. I got that on a worm and a dead maggot. Right, well that's worked certainly. All the fish are close now, and to be honest, we've had a lovely session. Probably must have £40, maybe more. That's some good ones, and quite weird really, because, well, not weird, I sort of expect it, but caught on maggots on the hook to start with, and in the end it was when the fish moved in. On the long line I caught better on the maggot, but on the short line I caught better on the worm. But that's probably because they've come in to feed. I mean, look at that, it's another £3. Maybe bigger. Beautiful, aren't they? Yeah, so they've come in close now, and like I said, when they come in close you don't normally have to move, you normally just fish that line now. I mean, look at them. Beautiful fish, aren't they? Beautiful fish, there you go. Might just be £3 that one. And that's a lovely day's fishing. So, lovely day's fishing. Caught long to start with, short to finish off with, and it don't get any better than that.